In that whole 3 hour time span, I went from not knowing Python to creating an algorithm that could process huge amount of data. Then I was like, I'm going to process that huge amount of data faster. Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this video, I wanted to talk about a experience I had a few years back where I had a job interview. They asked me to program something in a programming language I did not know. So in this video, I wanted to tell you how I learned Python in 3 hours during a job interview. Let's go. All right, so let's set up the scene first. I was applying to a job to help data scientists do data analysis on a supercomputer. So this job required some knowledge of big data analytics and programming and how to use a supercomputer. That was also a job I was applying to at my previous employer, and I was able to do this interview from my desk. I was also familiar with the environment, so a lot of those things were easy. Basically, what happened is I showed up at the interview, which was over WebEx, and he gave me the assignment, which was here's a 100 GB file. Now I need you to count how many times each word occurs in this file. Now, a 100 GB file is huge. You can't just like open it and do Control F or whatever. Now, of course, Control F would be a dumb idea, but you get the idea. You can't just load this whole thing up into memory. Even though you have a supercomputer, you can't just take up like a node with 100 GB of memory and run your analysis for a job interview. You have to do it a little bit more smart. Now, the assignment had to be completed in one of 2 or 3 languages. And honestly, I don't remember the languages. All that I know is that Python was in the mix, and that's the only one I felt the most comfortable learning. I didn't know any of those other programming languages. I don't even know if it was in the job requirements. I don't remember. But here's what happened. So I had 3 hours at my desk. I could use anything I wanted. Now, obviously, I couldn't just like copy code to count word frequencies. I can't just do something that blatantly obvious. But I had 3 hours to do it. And so I decided to go with Python. So now the question is, how did I learn Python in 3 hours during a job interview? Now, obviously, the knowledge didn't just come into my head and I just became proficient in Python. But Python was not the first programming language I learned. Definitely is not the last. And I think one thing important about learning a programming language to solve a specific task is you have to first understand the problem. You have to first understand the problem and how to solve it. You can't just go and learn Python. Python is the tool. The question is, how do you make your algorithm work in Python? And that is a much smaller problem than learning Python. So basically, the way I approach this is like, okay, so here's a problem, here's the algorithm. So the algorithm would be create a hash table that will contain all your words and their frequencies, because that's the output. You want to save it first. Second, you want to open your file stream to that file. Third, you have to iterate while the file is still not end of file, right? There's a special, I don't know how, end of file character or whatever, it returns -1 or whatever. Once you have your string, you tokenize it, you split it up by space, comma, period, what have you. Whatever punctuation you would have, you split it up by that, and that gives you the list of words in that piece of text that you read. Then you go over each of these words and you check if they're in the hash table. If they're not in the hash table, you add the word. So let's look at how many things I learned to do this. I learned how to create a hash table. I learned how to open a file stream. I learned how to loop, and I learned how to look up a hash table. That's it. Those are the 4 things I learned for this algorithm. And I think that took me the better part of like an hour to an hour and a half. But the problem is it took forever to run, right? It took, I don't know, half an hour to run the whole code, which was a little bit too much for my taste. So I was like, I have another hour and a half. So how about I see if I can do some parallel processing in that time span? And so I was like, all right, let's Well, this thing is running for 30 minutes. Let's take a look at multi-threading, or parallel processing in Python. I was familiar with some C++ where you used fork and basically you get a completely different child process. The idea with multi-threading is not that difficult. It's really split up the task. Each thread will open the file at a different location, and they will all read the files. They will all output their um, dictionary, their hash table, and then I just have to, once all the threads are done, I just have to read the content of those files and create one master file. So that's what I did. And it turns out that Python is actually very good at that, creating multi-threads. That was surprisingly not the hardest part. So basically, in that whole 3 hour time span, I went from not knowing Python to creating an algorithm that could process huge amount of data. And then I was like, I'm going to process that huge amount of data faster. And I think the lesson here is really the programming language doesn't matter. The programming language is not the hurdle in creating a tool, creating code. I think the programming language is the easiest thing to learn. The skills that brought me there and the skills that allowed me to be able to do this in 3 hours in the middle of a job interview is really like the fundamentals of programming, understanding how a computer works and how code works and how algorithms work at a fundamental level. And if you are trying to jump into that journey in programming, I really invite you to learn how to write programs, how to give clear instructions to a computer rather than a specific language. Focus really on why you're writing the code and why you're writing it this way. I think it's very easy for programmers and beginners, especially beginners, to just Google how to do X, find the answer, copy, paste, and that's the end of it. The question is really, how does this work on a fundamental level? How does this piece of code function? What is the logic behind that? Why did the person who wrote this code on Stack Overflow wrote it that way? If you don't get those fundamentals of programming and code and how computers work, I think that you're going to be in big trouble. So again, don't focus on the language. The language is easy once you master everything else. They're all the same. They all have their own little quirks, but they're really fundamentally the same thing, right? So just certain programming languages are more efficient at certain things. R is more efficient at handling data. JavaScript is more efficient at handling HTML. C++ is faster because it's compiled. There's so many things, but overall, the whole concept of programming is the same. You can if you can write your master code, if you can write your outline, your skeleton of your code, I can promise you that you can easily translate that into the each languages. So another thing you should focus on is algorithms. You need to understand algorithms. And I mean, one website that I love. It's made for technical interviews for software developers, and that's Algo Expert. It's very fun to just go and have a problem and just have to solve it through code. And it's not this whole algorithm and solving with algorithms and creating algorithms is a very important mental gymnastics for software engineers. And it may not seem like it at first, but when you are writing code for the cloud, when you are deploying code, it's very important to understand how and why something runs. It's really important to understand how does this handle data. If you have an algorithm that the more data you give it, the more time it takes, like exponential, factorially, like the curve goes like this, factorially, as opposed to linearly or constant. Hey guys, Editing Carolyn here. So I realized I forgot to add how the job interview went and what happened to this job afterwards. So I aced the job interview. I did very well. But a week or two later, they decided they're going to pull the job completely and repost a new job that merges two job postings they had. So, helping scientists and administering the supercomputer. So, I ended up not being qualified for that second part of the job, and so therefore I was not selected to be the person who ended up doing this job. I think I learned a lot and I got a good story out of it. So in the end, I think I win. The person who ended up getting the job was very good. She was very good at her job. Last time I checked, last time I was there, and yeah. So if you're just starting your programming journey in the cloud, I have a video for you right here about programming languages in the cloud in less than 3 minutes. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.